Hello and welcome to Outlook Talks. In this, we have a series of conversations with interesting people, academics, scholars, politicians, even musicians, writers, poets, whoever we feel are interesting and are involved in the politics of the country. It's a very informal discussion, and today we have Tanvir Aeijaz with us. He's a professor in Delhi University, scholar, writer, author, and Chinky Sinha, Outlook editor. Thank you very much, Tanvir.
Thank you
It's
so
always a
much.
pleasure to speak to you. Tanvir had in fact just written an article on the Muslim question in the Outlook in Outlook. I think two issues ago, and so we were we thought we could just sort of start off from there, taking that as a starting point. So the three things that you mentioned there of education, of their backwardness, the in the sense that they have just no representation in politics. I think it's been 4% since independence is what you mentioned.
Yeah, it
So
hovers around 4%, on an
whichever
average.
whichever party
Yeah,
is in power, I mean, whether it was Congress or BJP or whoever else, right? And this is true for states too.
yeah,
I think
yeah,
in
yeah,
most
yeah.
state governments as well. So why do you think? I mean, firstly, of course, why is it so low? And what can one do to sort of some reform in this area?
Yeah, I think it's the question of underrepresentation. Muslims perhaps are looking for their representation. And the story goes back to partition days, actually, because of the partition, uh, this idea that Muslims, they do not belong to this country. And therefore, they should not have their representation. And in fact, I mean, this whole idea of marginalization of Muslims has partition in the backdrop, right? Post partition, the political parties, it was the job of the political parties to address to this very serious question of underrepresentation. But political parties are the organizations, and they work on certain kind of rationality, which is called as winnability of the candidates, right?
Yeah.
So therefore, given this background of animosity, particularly between Hindus and Muslims, they were not so keen on giving tickets to Muslims. But initially, yes, because of the idea of liberal India, the idea of secular India, the idea that India will now become a sort of a not a theocratic state, but as a secular state. So therefore, we need to have representation, and therefore, in the first election, they had Muslims. I think more than 4% of the Muslims were there in the first elections, particularly also in the second elections. But slowly and slowly it
Hmm.
waned.
Hmm.
It waned, and if you make a graph, you will see that it's not that in one particular year there is high representation, or any particular year there is low representation. It somewhere sticks around 3 to 4%, right? Somewhere sticks around that figure. Because I was just looking at the map. So it appears like that. Now the question is that what to do with this
Yeah.
underrepresentation. I think this question needs to be addressed at two levels. One is the response of political parties. Now, it is the political party which needs to. I mean, this whole question came up with the representation of women also. It's very,
Yeah.
very, very much similar to that,
Yeah.
right? So, for women, of course, there is the question of reservation, and then the issue of reservation, and there was a movement for reservation. And of course, you're seeing that how now, after some years, some time, we'll have 33% reservation. The bill is passed, and
Yeah.
I'm not. I mean, it's very sure that the bill won't be taken back now. But the question of reservation when it comes about Muslims, political representation, uh, there are problems. There are problems. The constitution is rigged up that reservations cannot be given on the basis of religion.
Religion.
Then, of course, the another question which is rigged up is that because they themselves are responsible, therefore they cannot. I mean, they have to look for their own leaders, right? I mean, who. Uh, their socio-economic, I mean, their rationality, for instance, right? So at that point of time, it is particularly, because I have also written a couple of pieces on Islamophobia.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So it's particularly that Islamophobia runs deep, which sort of cancels the whole idea that yes, they need representation, right?
But this question with this, most parties the excuse that they give about this winnability. On the other side, if you throw it on the other side, isn't it also true that there have really been not so many Muslim leaders who have come from the ground, who have had a slightly broader view of things, rather than just this community being the single point of their existence. I mean, why hasn't India thrown up Muslim leaders?
Right. I mean, this is a very, very important question and very difficult question actually to answer. It's because of the fact that, look, you'll have to also understand that they are left out, in terms of the whole movement of society, So they are pasmandas largely, right? 85% of the Muslims are backward,
Hmm.
mostly in terms of socio-economic condition, and largely, they are very much concerned about their own security because of the kind of violence. No country, you pick up any country where you have for the last 70 years such kind of a protracted violence. If you look into the riots, you will see, if there are a lot of studies which explains that there is a cycle of riots actually, after some years, but now since it has waned because of the fact that there's a lot of media presence and all those, and social media also. But over the years there has been a lot of violence, right, in terms of and which some of these scholars have called it as institutional riots. Paul
Hmm.
Brass has called it as
Hmm.
institutional rights system exists in India. Now, because they are insecure and because they are backward socially and economically, so I would say that yes, of course, they are more focused towards their religion, right? They are more, they are more into, they have a secular outlook in terms of how to choose, whom to choose their representative. In fact, I was just mulling over this fact that Muslims actually do not have a choice when they go to vote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They have only one choice, and that is the candidate who can defeat BJP.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right, so they do not have a choice,
Yes.
like their counterpart.
Yeah.
Right, like their counterpart who can choose
Yeah. It's
A, who
like a
can choose
by
B, who can,
default rather
yeah,
than a
yeah.
real
So
choice. Yeah.
when they exercise their vote, they are not exercising their rationality.
Yeah.
Right,
It's
they're
like elimination
exercising their
process
fear.
kind
That's
of
right.
a
Yeah.
They're
situation.
exercising their fear.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so therefore, and then this whole politics of ghettoization takes place because of this violence and insecurity. You will see, Muslims, they cobble up together, they stay in a specific area. So once Muslims stay in that specific area, the population, of course, goes beyond, let's say, 15% goes to 20%, or maybe then, those places you find Muslim candidates are propped up by regional parties, of course, maybe central parties also.
Hmm.
But then, of course, the moment when a Muslim candidate is propped up by one strong regional parties, you will see a lot of other parties also propping up Muslim candidates.
That's right.
Right,
Yeah.
to cancel out each
Yeah.
other. And then finally, you will see even in Rampur also,
Yeah.
not a Muslim candidate
Yeah.
wins. Right,
So
so it's a,
inadvertently it becomes a Muslim seat.
so yes, so therefore leadership becomes very difficult in that case, right? A, and B, many times some leaders have tried, so any Muslim who is a modern, who is a secular, they somehow are rejected by the Muslim population.
I wanted to ask one thing. See, you pointed it out in your earlier bit that there is this secular, there's this category called progressive Muslims now. And a lot of people talk about that. Now, what is that? What is this division within the community itself, which is also propped by the other communities? He's a progressive Muslim. And what's the progressive Muslim supposed to do politically and electorally? That's one. And the second one is about this particular elections. Obviously, there has been a trend since the 90s, ever since the demolition of the Babri Masjid, and obviously before that, but let's not even go further back. But there's a distinct trend from there on. And then 14 was Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. Then 19 comes. Then more of this Hindutva thing. And now we are seeing a lot of this in the public domain, like openly doing, like saying things, infiltrators, these kinds of uh, words are being used that they will take away your Mangal Sutra, whatever, all, Mujra, things like that. So, on two fronts, what does this signal? And does it really work when you kind of target one particular, and why only Muslims have been targeted in that sense. There are other communities as well.
So the answer to your first question is that what Muslims generally would like to have their leader as a practicing Muslim, right?
Hmm.
So progressive Muslims normally are not practicing Muslims, right? They would also like to see their representative somebody like in terms of at least having some symbols or markers of being identified as Muslims. So therefore, I mean, it's slightly difficult to have. OIC, I see him as progressive,
But what is
right?
a progressive Muslim? What
OIC,
is
I see him as practicing also,
Hmm.
right? And OIC, I see him having markers of Muslim community also, right?
Yeah.
The visible markers,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That is there, right? But the word OIC or the name OIC generates a lot of hate amongst a lot of Hindus, right? That he is the one, he's a
Yeah, the divisive.
they're divisive, right? So
pro-
he's the one who is dividing the society. So anybody for that matter, right? Anybody for that matter. In fact, even I think there are not just Muslims, but even non-Muslims also, right? Hindus, who tries to represent Muslims, who speaks on behalf of Muslims, right? They are being categorized as anti-national.
Or wannabe Muslims, this is like another
Yeah.
category.
Yeah.
So
of-
anti-nationals,
Yeah.
yeah.
because this whole lexicon of
Yeah.
Pakistan comes in, and Islamophobia gives them a very good excuse for dubbing them as anti-national or foreign or something like that, right? So so that is a difficult problem, right? It's a very very vexed issue actually, that
Yeah.
that who should be the representative of Muslims.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Muslims themselves can't become representative of Muslims, because and the moment if you have somebody who is actually slightly more religious, like somebody in Assam, for example,
Hmm.
Ajmal, I think
Badruddin.
Badruddin,
Badruddin,
yes. So the moment if somebody is like that, he's again very dubbed as somebody who is very very communal, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
very communal, very divisive. So Muslims are in dire straits. They can neither have a progressive leader who can represent. They can nor they can have somebody from their community who looks like them, or so there is a problem with their representation. So yeah, I was talking about that. It is the because 200 million Muslims, one third of these states where you have their presence, who can make a difference politically. So this gives the answer to the second question, is that they may be invisible, right? They may be invisible, but electorally, they are decisive at a lot of places, because of the fact that we are not two-party system, we are a multi-party
Yeah,
system,
exactly.
right? And all national parties, they have their own prop-ups, right? And they calculate their vote shares, right? So Muslims are politically decisive, right? In Uttar Pradesh, you see, the names are being deleted, right? We just heard there was a petition, and the election commission gave it to the Supreme Court that we will see that the name should not be deleted, right? The last time, in fact, 23, I think, election commission gave this assurance to Supreme Court that we would not allow this to happen. The process of the electoral process, Muslims going to vote, that is made difficult for Muslim women, for example,
Yeah.
right? So I read a couple of pieces, how Muslim women, when they go to vote, their process of voting becomes so difficult. They're asked Aadhaar card, they are asked to go back home, get your Aadhaar card. So there is clearly,
Yeah.
a sort of victimization, and it is happening in those areas where they matter.
Yeah.
They can matter, or they matter. So therefore, and this whole Islamophobia is also very political in nature,
Of course, yeah.
because they want to On the other hand, the Hindutva politics want to consolidate the Hindu votes because they have this understanding that their votes are scattered.
Yeah.
They are not consolidated.
Yeah.
So more you whip up Islamophobia,
The more
more
consolidation you get.
consolidation it takes place.
Yeah.
And some of these studies also had shown that riots and Hindutva violence and all these things, and whipping up Islamophobia leads to consolidation.
So that's why
right?
this kind of language and this kind of rhetoric.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's a very strategic polarization process.
But what about constitutionally? Is it okay to kind of do this, or
Islamophobia constitutionally is an offense.
Exactly. That's what I
Right.
was.
Hate speech.
Even conversely,
Yeah.
hate speech is an offense.
Exactly.
Right. So anything which demeans or sort of attacks any religion to gain votes is an offense. Right. Not only just in the Peoples of Representation Act or Model Code of Conduct, but otherwise also in common ordinary law, it's an offense. Right, there are a lot of sections which are there which can be used. Right, so but still, so we see. I think we need more strong election commission also to have
Yes.
a better environment where at least those who are on the margins, particularly Muslims, can exercise their choice. Right.
And even better media, I suppose. Because
Yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah.
Media must help in creating this condition.
In this, what you just said, basically underrepresentation is making them invisible electorally, politically. Have you also sort of seen in the last, particularly in the last last decade, let's say, the last 2 terms, a kind of invisibilization in general life, in social, in society, in cultural life, in academia, in say programs that used to happen earlier are not happening anymore, or at least it's discouraged.
Yeah, I think, this hate speech, it cuts deep into the society, right? And it goes into all the levels because hate speech attunes your behavior towards hate, right? That's the
Exactly.
idea of hate speech.
Yeah.
So behaviorally, one starts, shifting and changing and start using a lot of instruments of hate. So one of the major instruments of hate is discrimination. You start discriminating, and this discrimination comes in jobs, right? I mean, to begin with, lots of studies are there.
Yeah.
Muslims are hired last and fired first, right? In organized sector.
In simple things like finding a flat in Bombay,
Yeah,
in Mumbai,
Or even Delhi
it's
now,
in Delhi,
actually.
in
Yeah.
various Ahmedabad, maybe, those kind of things.
So scholars have called it as sort of penalty punishments, right?
Yeah.
So they get certain kind of punishment because they are Muslims, therefore they get those punishment. Otherwise, in the ordinary
Correct.
circumstances,
Yeah.
it would
So
not
they're
have
starting with
happened,
that
right?
disadvantage. I
Yeah.
mean,
So both in the formal economic sector, right, you have this whole idea of hiring last and firing first. That happened. Why this hiring last and firing first? Because that was an eye opener during COVID period, right? Because
Yeah.
there was a lot of rush and a lot of data is also available, right? Informal, this whole question of taking away their jobs. Biryani, for example.
Yeah. The biryani is like
Yeah.
forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this whole lynching and violence, particularly to the Muslims who are doing their work in the informal sector, right? So both formal and informal sector, there is a sort of a threat, security threat, and then you come down to,
But-
in academia, right? Universities. I would like to mention about this university, and I've been talking about this also, that over this last couple of years in Delhi University, we have had around more than 5,000 appointments. But still the figure is not out. But some of us were keen on trying to understand that how many Muslims are being
Yeah.
appointed. So actually, we could not find much. Not even 2% of the Muslims were appointed. In fact, in my college, some of the Muslims who were teaching having degrees from abroad, from US, they were chucked out, right? We were so shocked that, somebody who's done from IIT Delhi and having his degree from US, how can he be chucked out? And he has taught for almost 7-8 years. How can he be chucked out just because he's a Muslim and is not conforming to certain kind of mainstreaming? That is what is being called as. So discrimination runs deep because hate brings in this kind of
It
discrimination.
does seem a very sorry state in that. But don't you, this what the other side says about for 75 years now, since independence, the every government has only seen them to appease, isn't there? I mean, there is some truth to that.
Yeah, appeasement, I would always say in terms of very, very symbolic, right? Not real appeasement. There is very, very symbolic appeasement, something like, if you make a Dalit president, that doesn't mean, that the condition of Dalits are improving. If you make a tribal president,
fact-
doesn't mean that the tribal's
In fact,
conditions are
Exactly.
in fact,
improving.
that is
right?
a charge that the appeasement has been so symbolic, and no government has really gone deep and understood,
That's
the
true.
problems, and
That's true.
and that is why their lot
So
is the way
therefore,
it is.
you pick up any committee reports, starting from Sachar committee
Such a
report.
committee, that's
I mean,
true.
there are lots before that also. There are a
Yeah.
lot of committee reports, but Sachar committee, post Sachar committee, these are two very important committees which talked about Muslim situations and their discrimination also. Oxfam has, I think, last year 23 came out with this whole report on discrimination on women, Muslims, and tribals, right? So Muslims discrimination was an eye opener, because nothing was done
Yeah.
post such a committee suggestions, right? Nothing was done. So therefore, there's something. I think it boils down to reservation, and that is the reason why the Hindutva politics wants to restrict the reservation, because the next question comes that if all these situations are so bad since independence and it's not improving, rather it's going from bad to worse. So what is the solution?
So, yeah.
So the immediate solution, because we compare, the immediate solution, if women who were in the margins getting reservation.
Yeah.
If Dalits, they were in the margins getting
Tribals,
reservation. Tribals, they're in the margins getting reservation. So why can't you give reservation to Muslims, right? So the real question about reservation is that whether you consider the whole Muslim community as backward or a very large section of Muslim community as backward. That is the question, right? That is, at the moment, the question of reservation, I think, is moving around this particular
And also,
important
what's
question.
keeping them backward for such
Yeah,
a long
yeah,
time? I
yeah,
think
that's
that's another important.
You want to move on to the federalism bit?
Yeah,
maybe?
actually, I
That's
had another question because you have written so much about federalism and also, secularism. Now, that has become a very strange situation, and we face it, and everybody else faces it. The moment you say you're secular, now people kind of like want to distance themselves from you,
Yeah.
And we've had
It's a bad
several
word,
examples.
almost a bad word.
It's just a bad word now. People then jump at you saying, "नहीं ये तो पहले था नहीं बाद में आया."
Yeah.
So what is going on in terms of, originally we were not a Hindu country, like let's say Hindu Rashtra.
Yeah.
So they've not given a blueprint of Hindu Rashtra. Well, what is it going to have? Like, for example, like as a woman, will I have any rights in that sense? Or what happens to secularism? And then, of course, federalism, which, regional parties do form kind of a backbone in terms of, getting diversity and multiple voices.
Yeah.
Now there
Yeah.
is this huge thing to one nation, one election, one
Yeah.
language, and everything about this oneness. And so what's going on? Like, what is happening here?
I mean, such a beautiful word, secular.
Now it's like they say secular.
Secular.
Yeah.
It has now
Yeah.
become an opprobrium.
Almost, yeah.
So, secularism and federalism, these are two major principles. Even the Supreme Court has called it as the basic structure of our constitution.
And I want you to also differentiate, a lot of people, and this we have been facing as even journalists.
Right, yeah.
So a lot of people will tell you that the secularism that you are talking about is the French model, where a state has no religion. And the other thing they say, which is the BJP's ideological, whatever, on their website, if you see, They say sarvadharm something,
Hmm,
like
hmm,
uh,
hmm.
all religions are equal. Now that's an important question to answer, that actually in the Constitution of India or the Supreme Court, which secularism is this in India? So
So India has, as you all know, this is the fact that it's very difficult now to remove secularism. Earlier there might have there might have been some sort of a plan to just expunge the word secularism from the preamble, and but secularism has its not ramifications, but it has its anchor in a lot of articles in the
exactly,
constitution,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's not so easy to whether you have that word secular in the preamble or not is not the question, right?
Yeah.
The question is basically about minority rights,
Hmm.
which is enshrined in the constitution, which is basically one of the fundamental rights, you can say. So that is there. Now, our constitution doesn't spell out exactly that what people should do and state should do.
Yeah.
But it does talk about that state should not have any religion,
Yeah.
Which is,
right?
yeah.
And state must have, I'll use my teacher's phrase is the state must have a principled distance from all religion,
Exactly.
right? And the principle of that distance must be based on a lot of political values. That's the idea of Indian secularism. It is not complete separation of
That's very well put, actually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
actually. But there
politics
is a
and
distance, right?
yeah. So there is a distance,
Seems
Yeah.
like
right?
there's no
And a
distance
state
now.
is not becoming, right?
Yeah.
State is not becoming a
Yeah.
religious state. So then of course that state would become a theocratic state,
Right.
right? So therefore I think people understand, secular, the word secular as a normative value has its relevance in all of us in our day-to-day practices, because secular means mundane, earthly,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So day-to-day activity is what we do together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Like we are hanging out together.
yeah, we are
every
hanging
day.
Yeah.
out together,
Yeah.
having a party
Yeah.
or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So it distances slightly itself from spirituality. So secular means that, right? And therefore the processes of secularization that takes place. So secular is an ideal condition. Secularization is the process by which these political institutions need to work upon.
Yeah.
And political parties, of course, they are very, very important tools for interest articulation. So they work towards a secularization process. But because of the fact that in the ideological spectrum, a conservative, we have to understand that right now the political party that is ruling the country is a conservative political party, right? So the conservative is attacking both the left and the center. So
Yeah.
therefore their attack is left liberal. Liberal largely you will find at the center level,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Left is a slightly, left of the center. So therefore, this attack on left liberal by
Yeah.
conservative, right, is about attacking secularism also, because
Exactly.
left and liberal, right, they distance themselves from conservatism in terms of their spiritual attainments, right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
So that's the reason why so therefore this word secular, in their understanding, the first attack should be there on secularism. So once secularism is defeated,
It's
right,
become like a big
Yeah.
thing in
yes,
all of
so
these
they have
years
managed.
now. Yeah, they've
It is
managed
the
to.
inability of the left liberal to counter their
Yeah.
attack. Right?
How do you
so that
counter this kind of attack, though?
it is again by creating institutions, right? And one of the major institutions, if you read Aaron Lipchart, if we start having consociational democracy, because it boils down to how we practice democracy. So we need to have more of associations. So secular associations, if we have more of that, right, more of cultural secular
Yeah.
or associations, and they keep on interacting with each other, so that is the way how they can counter, which of course
It's not happening.
it's not happening.
Yeah.
The associations building, because people are scared,
Yeah,
right?
of course.
They are not forming associations. They are not, for example, in my society I thought that I should form an association which would promote all sorts of cultural activities. There's so many kids around, they can come. Let's have a reading group, this club, that club. But then there is a problem. There is a problem, and one will have to struggle. Of course, one will have to struggle. One will have to act at times very subtly to promote
No,
those
if you look
associations.
at the word, like for example, mujra. Now, mujra
Yes.
is not a bad thing.
Yes,
You
yes,
know,
of
so
course.
but the way that it's used, like the Tawayuf's contribution, and Sabha, there was this film, no, the last song or the other song,
Yeah.
which addresses this thing also, that how erasure takes place, of so mujra becomes a bad word, which
Yes,
it shouldn't have been, because
Yes,
it's it's one of the art forms. But even in those forms, like if you talk about cultural whatever,
yeah.
and I think culture, we always kind of like dismiss like one of these side things, but actually it's one of the
very
biggest.
misogynistic,
Yeah,
right?
it is. Yeah.
So, I mean, of course, so patriarchy, misogyny, I think these will play. The
Yeah.
moment when you attack liberal ideas, the moment when you attack left ideas, so this will come to
And
play.
mutton and
Patriarchy.
machli also have become a little
Mutton,
bit like,
machli,
Yeah.
all those stuff. So
But you're
the
right.
politics
I mean,
of veg and non-veg.
but
So
the only way.
can I respond to the
Yeah, yeah.
federal issue?
Yeah.
Right. Because federal is, now we are talking a lot on asymmetrical federalism.
yeah,
Right. And what it means is that, the state boundaries should not restrict the politics. So because diversity is not restricted within the state boundaries, diversity cuts across state boundaries. And therefore, if we have to have a better democracy would mean what? Accommodation of diversity, or, holding together, taking together this whole diversity. So therefore, we have to move beyond states.
yeah.
Right. And the moment when we move beyond states, we encounter, these language, maybe literature, I mean, the literature of a region. So the region becomes more important, not the state, right? So I think for me, I'm working on this. Asymmetrical federalism is one of the solutions, to have better accommodation of diversity, right? And this, of course, political party would need to understand that they cannot restrict themselves in one state as a regional party. They'll have to move beyond,
Many tried, but it seems like it's very, very difficult to kind of move beyond that.
It's high time political parties should engage academia and then
they'll help.
Absolutely, Tanvir. I think they should really consult you more often, and to get. And I know I think we are running out of time now, and we have to conclude this. But please don't give up on your society, and getting people together.
I have one last question. But like, don't give up. But we went to Kashmir. Now that is the Muslim majority state, the only state in India. Now it ties into this federalism question as well. So they did delimitation over there, bifurcated it, all kinds of it, made it a union territory, let's say. So this federalism question that we talk about now, there is one state like, Kashmir is a laboratory experiment in a way that they don't want. I don't know what it is. So that's what I want to ask you in terms of the federalism debate or the question. How does that figure in?
I think, you'll have to get into the history of Kashmir. Because there is a history of Kashmir, and the question is of accommodation. The question is of how, because the idea of secessionism comes in a lot of time.
Yeah.
The idea of belonging comes a lot of time.
I think that is the question now. Secessionism gone.
No, still you never know.
Yeah, you never know.
You never know, because there are a lot of theories which says that if you suppress any movement, too much, it will recur sometime later, right? It doesn't. The problem is not solved, right? So the best way of solving conflicts is to integrate, a lot of things.
Yeah,
It
they
should
say
not be
integration is
dominant.
Otherwise,
complete.
it always in some form or the
Yes,
other. It
yes,
will,
yes. So what are we like environment? We have to
yeah,
leave good environment for our kids.
Exactly.
Similarly, we need to leave good solutions to our kids
yeah,
rather
Yeah.
than
favorable
make
conditions.
make
Yeah,
those kids, later on fight. So anyway, so Kashmir is a very typical example. There are two very typical examples which fits in this whole idea of asymmetrical federalism,
Yeah.
which means that they need to be treated differently.
Hmm.
Lots of states, Goa for instance,
Yeah.
right? I had been to Goa, so I
Yeah.
interacted with a lot of, that project is also there. So within my asymmetrical federalism, so Goa, Kashmir, Northeast, a lot of places, Nagaland for example.
Yeah.
Now, how do you respond to a question when Nagas say that we will have a separate constitution, we'll have a separate
yeah,
flag, and we don't belong to India?
Exactly.
They
yeah,
say it openly,
yeah,
Yeah.
right? So how do you respond to that, right? So therefore, our constitution makers, they had article 371, 370. We should have worked on these articles properly, and rather than just simply rejecting them.
But weren't they also say that these were temporary provisions? Article 370, for instance, was a temporary. But then the Constituent Assembly was
that
not
was
there.
at the time of Constituent Assembly,
Exactly.
and the backdrop of partition, and all those ideas were there. So I think we should not always pick up the debates in the manner in which it took place
Exactly.
at the time of Constituent
yeah,
Assembly.
Yeah.
Of course, so but there are a lot of good debates. Federalism, because the Constituent Assembly makers, they wanted a very strong center, right? Therefore, we do not have the kind of the idea of federalism. So India is not a federal country as such. It's a union of states,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't talk about federal, but the idea that yes, because it's so diverse, and we need to share the sovereignty. So sovereignty should not be just located at one
That's why you
point.
have the state list, central
So
list. Yeah.
therefore, so sharing of sovereignty, and also giving some regions autonomy in terms of deciding about their own policies,
Hmm.
their own laws, right? So sharing, and and some sort of independence, in terms of autonomy. That was the idea of federalism. But the backdrop of partition, in the backdrop of violence that occurred, and of course, we should not forget, that during during just before the independence, right? The kind of contestation which was there between Muslim League, Hindu
Yes.
Mahasabha, we simply do not read that how they were fighting. We
Yeah.
always focus
Yeah.
on Gandhi and Nehru and Congress, but we have never focused on like how they were fighting with each
Yeah.
other. It's not just only Muslim League,
Yeah.
or not just only Hindu
That's right.
Sabha,
Yeah.
right? But both of them were fighting, and very interestingly, with this, I may end. The Urdu media,
Yeah.
in the absence of, now since you've brought this whole concept of secularism, in the absence of any Urdu word of secular, they started writing La Mazhab. Mazhab is religion, La is no religion.
Hmm.
So probably most of the Muslims, the backward Muslims, and most of the Muslims, they thought that in independent India they would have no religion.
Okay. Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
what a lot of people who have studied from
Okay.
That's a very
Harvard,
interesting
Oxford
point.
and all. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
very interesting. I can give you the source, where
Yeah.
all these things are. Where they,
Mhm.
so they were so terrified, and
Hmm.
Muslim League picked on it. That look,
Hmm.
they are. It is right. Secular, of course, means that they'll take your religion,
Yeah.
Wow.
right? But it wasn't like that. So look
Yeah.
at the way how things were happening at that point of time. So there was a lot of chaos and
Yeah.
confusion. So, but the fact that India became a country which is quite centrist, strong at the center, and therefore there is more possibility of India becoming authoritarian. Given just little bit of a space, it becomes authoritarian,
Yeah.
right? So look at the executive. You can see the functioning of executive since independence. The moment it gets a little bit of a space,
Yeah,
it
it'll-
becomes authoritarian, because the constitution provides them. There are so many articles
Okay.
which talks about all India services, governor, for example.
Exactly.
There's so many institutions which are there in the constitution which helps them to become so strong. There's an overlap overlap of functions. So executive takes over a lot of judiciary function,
Yeah.
takes over a lot of legislative functions, and becomes authoritarian. So therefore, I mean, we should not
Okay.
be
And
surprised to
370
see.
is one example of
And
that,
370
actually.
is so
Okay.
one should not be surprised
Okay.
if the present government, we are seeing it as quite an authoritarian government.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much, Tanvir ji. That was very
Thank you so much.
interesting
Yeah.
Thank
and
you so
very.
much for having me
Thank
here.
you very much. Thank you very much for watching.